And then I propose we, given that we have a long list of things to cover today, that we give it a start. So here we go. First of all, very welcome to all of you to this final webinar of the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition of 2021. Just for you to know, we are recording this webinar so that we can also allow those who were not able to be present with us today to view it. We'll upload it in the coming days on our website and YouTube channel. So thank you all for being here and for making the time to hear from our presenters on this very important topic. I'll be your kind of host, let's say, today. I'll take you through the various presentations. To start, let me briefly introduce myself for those who do not yet know me. I'm Hans Merket. I'm a researcher for IPIS. We are the International Peace Information Service, a research institute / NGO based in Belgium, and we are a member of the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalitions for several years already. Let me then now introduce our distinguished presenters for today. First of all, we have Shamiso Mtisi, who is the coordinator of our coalition, also Deputy Director of ZELA, the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association. He will be providing opening remarks for today's webinar in order to highlight the relevance of the issues that we will be talking about today. Two other members of our coalition that we'll hear from today are Thabo Lerotoli and Paul Créchon-Beninga, and they will be presenting some of the grassroots research that the coalition has been doing throughout the past year, respectively on Lesotho and the Central African Republic. Thabo is the president and one of the founders of the Maluti Community Development Forum, which is an organization that works with communities living in the diamond mining highlands of Lesotho. And we have Paul Créchon-Beninga, who's the director of the Central African Center for Research and Geopolitical Analysis. They have a mission to promote transparency in the extractive sector in the Central African Republic. Now, our guests today also include Joanne Lebert and Kesha Frank. They are not members of the coalition, but they will be sharing some of their important perspectives with us today based on their experiences and expertise. First of all, Joanne, she will talk about due diligence and what it means, as she is not only the executive director of Impact, but also the civil society co-chair of the multi-stakeholder group of the OECD Responsible Mineral Supply Chain Forum. Kesha Frank, she will talk about how one company, the company where she is general manager and head of production, namely the Fairtrade Responsible Jewelry Company, how that company navigates due diligence in diamond purchasing today. And then I turn to another member of our coalition, which is Simiso Mlevu. She's the media liaison and project officer of the Center for Natural Resource Governance in Zimbabwe. And Simiso will present our coalition's vision for industry action, for specific steps that, in our view, diamond and jewelry industries can take right now to end the deadlock in addressing the ongoing problem of conflict diamonds. And then finally, we'll have a Q&A session facilitated by Christina T. Miller and Jared Holstein, who have been providing support to the coalition and engaging with industry since February 2021. And also our coordinator, Shamiso, will present some closing remarks at the end. Now, that is it for the introductions. I'm not sure whether we actually have Shamiso already with us right now to provide the opening remarks. Shamiso, are you there? We apparently don't seem to have Shamiso. That might be, as often, a problem with connection and connectivity, as Shamiso is currently traveling, but he was trying to join us from where he is currently based. I propose I'll take it over for some of the opening remarks so that we don't lose too much time. And then we'll see if Shamiso is still able to join us later. We can hand it back to him. So as I've been working with Chamiso on some of the opening remarks, I'll be able to cover that. Here we go. So as with the KP Civil Society Coalition, we have in the past mainly targeted our advocacy at governments within the framework of the Kimberley process. Now, after another failed reform cycle at the end of 2019, that again did not produce any meaningful improvements to the Kimberley process certification scheme, we decided early 2022 to change our approach and increasingly target this diverse diamond industry outside the confines of the Kimberley process. And the first important step in this regard was our campaign video, which we introduced last year and which we hope all of you have seen, in which we raised attention for ignored cases of diamond-related conflict and violence, which were being whitewashed as conflict-free by the Kimberley process certification scheme. Now, following our last webinar, that was in March 2021, we had a whole series of discussions with industry associations, companies, and NGOs from across the globe. And this taught us a lot about what is currently being done, what is not being done, and how to improve the overall approach. Now, civil society is often criticized that they only point to problems. However, these problems are often ignored, and civil society, as civil society, we feel it is our role to shed light on them. Yet we do not want to stop here. For years, we have elaborated and presented concrete proposals to address weaknesses and loopholes in the Kimberley process certification scheme. Now, as these proposals have been ignored over and over again, we decided to change our focus and start engaging more with industry outside the confines of the KP to detect and promote what they can do whilst not waiting idly for government action. Now, throughout our engagement, we understood that many companies and industry associations equally want to move forward in this regard, and many of them have already committed to the principles of responsible sourcing. Now, in our view, it is time to put these principles into practice, to stop diamonds from causing violence, to make sure that tragedies such as the killings of locals by a private security company in Tanzania, or the deadly spill of toxic diamond mining waste in Angola and DRC never happen again. And today we'll present to you our ideas for what will make a difference, what important steps can be taken to move this forward. And we'll start today by presenting some of the research, some of the engagement with communities the coalition has done throughout the past year. Can I ask Christina to put on the slides? Yes, thank you. So we have been doing in several countries, and 7 to be specific, grassroots research on the local impact of diamond mining, because in our view there are huge data gaps on how diamond mining operations impact both positively and negatively communities living from or nearby diamond mining operations. We have done this through mobile data collection campaigns with members of our coalition visiting mining areas and surveying communities across many diamond mining regions to better understand how they perceive this impact, what are the socioeconomic and human rights impacts that are associated with these operations. Now, we will publish these findings in the coming months and distribute them widely among all stakeholders involved, because we believe that better understanding this impact is a key condition to optimizing policies and approaches that maximize benefits and minimize harms. Now, while you will have to wait a few more weeks before these results are out, we can already give you a sneak peek today, and we'll do that with the presentations of Thabo and Paul Créchant. I remind you to switch on translation, as Paul Créchant's presentation will be in French, but we'll start with Thabo, who will talk about the specific case of industrial mining in Lesotho. Thabo, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you very much, Hans. My name is Thabo Logotodi from Lesotho, as it has been explained. So let me just briefly give you the background of Lesotho. And as you can probably see from the slideshow, those who are fortunate enough to see, Lesotho is quite a small country of about 30,000 kilometers 4 square kilometers and 2 million inhabitants, which means we are quite a very small population. Its highlands hosts several industrial mines that are renowned for producing some of the highest quality gem diamonds in the world. Next slide. And probably from the picture that we have displayed is one of the biggest mines in Lesotho, which is the Sont diamonds. We recently conducted some survey that sought to depict some of the critical issues that affect our people who are affected by the mining industry. We surveyed about 19 villages nearby industrial diamond mines. And this survey was conducted sometime in February to March 2021. Some of the things that came out of that study were some serious rampant poverty, little access to health and education services, general discontent about how mines affect their lives, reporting numerous grievances, such as limited to no community engagement, poor redistribution of benefits, absence of employment opportunities, water and dust pollution, blastings and trucks causing cause cracks, cases pending before courts for various redresses, including pleas for relocation and compensation. And some of the things that I want to highlight in particular in this slide include these cases which are before courts of Lesotho. You can understand that people are already negatively affected, like we are talking indigent communities, serious indigent communities, who cannot even access justice to the courts of Lesotho. So it's a big challenge. So we had to intervene as an organization in terms of how we bring about such cases to courts, because they are seriously threatened by possible dams that can burst anytime. Next slide, please. So maybe before we can even talk about how we can engage with the mining industry, I must highlight that there are some serious reforms that need to be done in terms of how we move forward, how the industry itself should engage the communities that are affected by mining industry. We want to highlight that as a Lesotho country, we are entering a time of reforms in various aspects of our laws. And we say, as we reform some of our legislations, we need to take, into consideration these people that are adversely affected by mining industry. So there should be urgent legislation reform that governs the mining industry. And that would include a need for corporate social responsibility, legal regulatory framework. We should remove legal and financial constraints for artisanal and small-scale mining, there has been a call from our communities that not only the big financial muscle companies that should be allowed to participate in the mining industry, but we should include our communities to participate in the artisanal mining industry so that at least they benefit directly from their resources. Imagine a situation where you have only overseas companies such as Gem Diamonds and many others that we can mention in this presentation that take the resources of our people simply because they don't have that financial muscle to directly benefit from what is their own. That is so sad. Imagine we can't plow back the diamonds that we are taking away from our communities. At some stage, these people will have their diamonds depleted. Depleted by who? By the foreign companies that are taking away from them. So we need to rethink community engagement. How do we, as the industry, assist the communities that are affected? So it's time for the industry to take affected communities more seriously, empower them through the transfer of skills and training, so that in case these people have to leave our countries for whatever reason, our communities, the local people, are able to directly execute the skills that they would have been trained on to mine for themselves. Again, we are saying enhance transparency and enable representation of affected communities in mining industry platforms. And as you can see now, our communities don't even know how to participate on such platforms. They don't even know if such platforms do exist, except when we engage them and educate them on various platforms that do exist within the industry. Next slide, please. Now, I have just demonstrated on with the illustration of a few pictures on the presentation there that we have some of our members from Maloranen community who were at court early this year, trying to seek some compensation. The compensation that they rightly do so because they have been engaged by the mining industries such as Lesotho Diamonds to do certain works which they are not even paid for. And that is so sad because we are talking about richest mines that are taking away their resources. And the next picture just demonstrates, one of the local gentlemen or a member of community who's explaining their dilemma caused by possible floods from the Lesotho Diamonds. And that goes to the very root of their grievance that they need to be relocated. So because of time, I may not dwell into details of that case, but I'll be later on guided by your questions that you may have. Some of these mines do some infrastructures such as the toilets that you see there, which is it's something shameful. Those who can see the picture that we have put there, you can imagine the mine that makes profits of billions and billions. making toilets of that kind for our communities? What would you think? Even today, as I speak to you, they have managed to pick up 2 biggest diamonds, one of the biggest diamonds. What are they doing for our communities? Isn't this an insult in a way? So we might say we are preventing the blood diamonds or conflict diamonds to enter the market, but are we not in kind or in another way supporting the conflict diamonds that are entering the world market? Let's be mindful of what we are doing as an industry. What are we saying to our communities? We are talking about the degradation of the environment that is being caused by the mining industry. We as an organization tried to put up, a notice board and many various notices to say, ladies and gentlemen, the mining industry, the government, let's engage and see how we protect our environment. And as you can see from the notice board that we have put there, this is one of the things that we are trying to say to various platforms, to various stakeholders. Let's protect our environment, because if we can't, then we'll be left with nothing. We'll be saying to our communities that are affected, there's nothing left for you. So it's important that as a country that hosts a lot of wetlands in the Southern Africa, let's protect what we have and see how we move forward. I can talk on and on, but because of time, I'm so sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. So please let me stop here, and I'll be guided by the questions later on, and then see which of those that I can address. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Unless I still have some slides that are left.
No, I think you covered it all, Thabo. Thank you very much. And it's a good reminder for everyone to put any questions you will have in the Q&A box. And then I'll hand it to Paul Créchon, who will present about conflict diamonds in the Central African Republic. Paul Créchon, je vous donne la parole.
Merci beaucoup de me passer la parole. Je ne sais pas si vous me recevez très bien.
Oui, on vous entend très bien.
Alors, ma présentation, elle est structurée. En fait, elle comporte principalement 3 parties. La première porte sur l'environnement de la République centrafricaine et de ses diamants. Ça veut dire une brève présentation de la RCA en lien avec l'historique de ces diamants. Ensuite, la deuxième partie, très rapidement, c'est de tirer les enseignements que nous avons effectivement pu en profiter lors de notre descente sur le terrain dans le cadre de ce projet de cartographie. Et enfin, nous allons présenter quelques recommandations qui en réalité aujourd'hui ne sont pas des recommandations, mais c'est des éléments de langage pour un plaidoyer. Alors, la première partie, très rapidement, est-ce que je suis bien perçu là-bas?
Oui, je crois que tout est clair.
D'accord. Alors, donc, la première partie, comme je disais, vous allez voir que la République centrafricaine, comme je le disais, est un d'Afrique centrale, estimé à 100 habitants, plus précisément 4,5 millions. Et est aussi minérale. Si on réussit effectivement à mettre en valeur toutes ces ressources-là, cela peut contribuer à améliorer les conditions de vie de sa population. Mais comme beaucoup d'entre vous le savent, la République centrafricaine est un pays qui a connu un cycle ou qui a connu des décennies de conflits, notamment des conflits militaro-politiques, qui ont fragilisé son tissu social, mais aussi son tissu économique. Et donc, vous allez voir que sur les 16 préfectures de la République centrafricaine à l'époque, modification aujourd'hui en ce moment, de ces 16 préfectures produisent de l'or et des diamants. Ce qui fait en sorte qu'on pourrait affirmer que le secteur minier quasiment au PIB centrafricain. Par le passé, le secteur minier, diamant et or y compris, contribuait au PIB dans les années 2007 à hauteur de 7%. Et en 2011, c'est à hauteur de 11%. Donc, il y a une progression qui, malheureusement, va être freinée. Cette progression va être freinée par les conflits armés, notamment en 2013, ce qui va conduire le processus de Kimberley à mettre un embargo sur les diamants centrafricains, parce que il y aura là bel et bien effectivement les diamants de sang. Mais je dois très rapidement dire ici que ces diamants, en fait, cet embargo n'a pas empêché à ce que les diamants centrafricains puissent sortir illégalement, notamment vers les régions frontalières avec le Cameroun, notamment vers Berberati et vers la Nana Mambéré. On va se rendre compte que les frontières sont poreuses et à partir de ce moment-là, les diamants continuent effectivement de circuler librement. Bon, pas librement, mais de circuler illégalement. Et à partir de 2015, on va voir que progressivement, le processus de Kimberley va lever l'embargo dans certaines zones, notamment les zones, notamment la région occidentale du pays. Et ça a permis notamment à ceux qui sont des activités minières, qui constituent leur principale source de revenus. Et donc, il y a quand même une reprise de ces activités dans les zones où l'embargo a été... Pour finir avec cette première part. Vous me recevez? Est-ce que vous me recevez? Vous me recevez?
Oui, on te reçoit, Paul Cresson, oui. Continuez.
Allô? Est-ce que vous me recevez?
Oui, on vous reçoit 5 sur 5, Paul Cresson. Vous pouvez continuer.
Voilà, donc j'étais en train de conclure la première partie en disant que il faut aussi dire que après la levée de cet embargo, les artisans miniers, notamment dans la région occidentale, les artisans miniers ont renoué avec cette activité d'exploitation minière, et donc ça permet à ceux-là de se prendre en charge. Et je dois finir en disant ici que le secteur minier artisanal en République centrafricaine est l'un des plus grands pourvoyeurs d'emplois. Au moins 62 000 personnes réparties. Ça, c'est une étude qui a été réalisée par les experts de l'IPIS, dont Hans. 62 000 personnes réparties sur 322 sites en 2019 dans la région occidentale ont été recensées comme travailleurs dans le secteur minier. Et il faut juste toute l'étendue du territoire parce que vous verrez que c'est juste la zone je vais dire, c'est juste dans une région, la région occidentale. Et donc, si vous allez dans d'autres régions, à l'ouest et autres, vous allez vous rendre compte effectivement qu'il y a également des travailleurs dans ces zones-là. C'est pour vous donner l'importance du secteur minier. Et donc, grâce à la faveur de ce projet, avec l'IPIS, le centre de recherche que j'y dirige et qui dispose d'un programme d'industrie extractive, a fait une descente dans 3 villes de la République centrafricaine et dans 3 régions différentes, notamment dans la Lobaye, à Boda, à Berberati, dans la préfecture de la Mambéré-Kadei, et à Nola, dans la préfecture de Sakara-Mambéré. Il est intéressant de noter que les sites que nous avons visités, parce que nous avons visité au total 42 sites, et les sites que nous avons visités ont en moyenne environ 52 travailleurs, hommes, femmes et enfants y compris. Et l'enfant, quand je parle des enfants, certainement, ça doit attirer votre attention. Je dois simplement vous dire que, effectivement, en République centrafricaine, dans certaines régions, dans certains sites, on trouve des enfants. Et c'est si vous voulez, l'une des difficultés relevées sur le terrain, sur laquelle nous pensons effectivement travailler là-dessus. Et donc, nous avons tiré 2 ou 3 enseignements, surtout les impacts. Au plan environnemental, les impacts environnementaux sont énormes. Vous allez voir que dans certaines régions, il n'y a pas les points d'eau potable. La population se ravitaille en eau au niveau des cours d'eau et des rivières. Or, lorsque on a des exploitations en livis, les artisans miniers dévient l'eau, font sortir l'eau de son lit pour pouvoir exploiter l'or et le diamant. À partir de ce moment-là, l'eau est polluée, l'eau est déviée de son lit, et l'eau qui est une source de ravitaillement, cette rivière ou ce cours d'eau qui est une source de ravitaillement pour la population, devient une source de maladie, parce qu'effectivement, l'eau est contaminée. Et également, il y a un dégât sur le plan environnemental, ça dégrade le sol. Lorsqu'il dévie l'eau de son lit, ça dégrade effectivement, ça dégrade le sol. On assiste également à des phénomènes d'érosion, d'inondation. C'est par exemple le cas de la ville de Nola. Quand vous arrivez dans cette ville de Nola, puisque certains sites miniers sont à moins d'1 kilomètre des habitations, parfois vous allez juste derrière une case, vous allez voir qu'il y a un chantier qui est en cours d'exploitation. À partir de ce moment-là, effectivement, l'eau stagne, l'eau déborde, et puis l'inondation et une dégradation très avancée de la route au niveau des infrastructures routières au niveau de la ville de Nola. C'est l'une des conséquences sur le plan environnemental. Sur le plan socio-économique, tout à l'heure, j'évoquais ici la question des enfants dans certains sites. Mais je dois ici rendre hommage à certaines organisations qui font un travail remarquable sur le terrain en combattant le phénomène de la déscolarisation, parce que il y a une forme d'accords locaux entre les responsables de ces ONG-là et les responsables des sites miniers qui amènent effectivement les gens, les exploitants miniers, à faire office d'obstacle à la présence des jeunes, des enfants plutôt, sur les sites miniers. Mais il faut le relever, le phénomène persiste, même s'il est en baisse aujourd'hui dans les sites que nous avons pu visiter. Un autre phénomène sur le plan socio-économique, c'est l'abandon des travaux champêtres. Nous étions à Boda qui est à moins de 185 km, à moins de 200 km de la ville de Bangui, plus précisément à 185 km de la ville de Bangui. On se rend compte que le tarif alimentaire est excessivement cher, simplement parce que aujourd'hui, vous allez vous rendre compte qu'il y a des gens qui délaissent les travaux champêtres pour inonder les chantiers. Et à partir de ce moment-là, les gens ne cultivent pas assez. Et là, ça fait penser à une crise alimentaire si on ne résout pas ce problème-là. L'autre problème, c'est la question du travail physique. La quasi-totalité, effectivement, des travaux qui sont menés sur ces sites-là, très souvent, sont faits de façon manuelle. Et à partir de ce moment-là, ça use. Et lorsque nous échangeons avec les artisans miniers, plus précisément avec les travailleurs sur les sites, notamment ceux qui créent avec les pellets, et effectivement, ils nous font remarquer, et parfois à l'œil nu, on voit quelqu'un qui a 30, 40 ans et qui se fatigue très vite, simplement parce que il est soumis à un rythme de travail infernal, ce d'autant plus que le travail est extrêmement difficile à réaliser manuellement. Et le dernier point, effectivement, la troisième partie. Le dernier point, c'est la question effectivement de la prostitution. De plus en plus, le phénomène de la prostitution se développe autour de ces sites-là, et notamment là où les chantiers sont quand même consistants en termes de ressources humaines. On voit effectivement une forme de... il y a des gens qui quittent parfois même leur localité pour aller s'installer sur ces sites-là, autour de ces sites-là, pour développer ce phénomène-là. Et vous voyez, généralement, on est dans l'arrière-pays, l'accès à des méthodes de prévention contre les maladies sexuellement transmissibles n'est pas très fluide, au point que ça peut faire effectivement penser à un phénomène effectivement des maladies, à une pandémie, si je puis m'exprimer de façon, des maladies sexuellement transmissibles. C'est d'autant plus que nous avons remarqué qu'avec le phénomène, avec la pandémie de la COVID-19, la question de la sensibilisation sur les maladies transmissibles, notamment le VIH-Sida, a baissé d'intensité. Et donc, ça peut effectivement faire en sorte que ce phénomène alors, je ne sais pas si je suis encore dans le temps. La dernière partie, c'est les recommandations. Et comme je disais, moi, je ne parle pas en réalité des recommandations, mais les recommandations constituent pour moi des éléments de langage pour faire un plaidoyer. Plaidoyer, pourquoi? Parce que le cas de la République centrafricaine aujourd'hui est un cas extrêmement grave, même si certains ne le perçoivent pas, aussi bien sur le plan social que sur le plan juridique, et je vais en parler parce que nous sommes aujourd'hui en train de... Il y a un atelier de la validation du projet du code a été validé récemment, et ça a été très difficile parce que l'État de plus en plus est en train de vicier. Et donc, je finis parce qu'on me fait signe que bientôt mon temps est terminé. Vous allez voir qu'il y a une nécessité d'accompagner, de prendre des mesures d'accompagnement, notamment en ce qui concerne les artisans miniers. Accompagnement, c'est également sur le plan de sensibilisation, en ce qui concerne ce qu'ils doivent faire. Par exemple, la question de la présence des enfants sur le terrain. Une question également de soutien aux moyens de subsistance alternatifs. Et là, du côté du gouvernement, nous pensons qu'il faut augmenter la lutte contre le phénomène d'exportation illégale de diamants. Parce que aujourd'hui, les diamants sont illégalement exportés et en grande quantité. Et peut-être le dernier point, je m'arrêterai là, c'est de dire qu'il faut aller vers la formalisation de l'activité minière en République centrafricaine, notamment en ce qui concerne l'exploitation à petite échelle. Ça permet d'avoir une certaine visibilité et une rentabilité à plus grande échelle de ces activités-là. Voilà pour tout ce que je pourrais vous dire. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Paul Christian, and apologies to everyone for the connection difficulties. I think especially in the English translation, it was not easy to understand. This is, of course, this highlights the difficult circumstances in which many within civil society in African countries have to work. Well, in order not to lose too much time, I'll hand it over to Joanne Lebert right now, who will make actually the link between these realities that we've just heard and how these realities can then inform corporate practices. And this is, of course, where due diligence comes in. So I'll pass it over to Joanne, and I'll start sharing her presentation. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Hans. Hello, everyone, and special thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel, and very honored to be with these esteemed panelists. While Hans queues up the PowerPoint, a word about impact. We have existed since 1986. We were formerly called Partnership Africa Canada, and so we work on natural resource management in areas where security and human rights are at risk. And we have a number of areas of intervention, including supply chain transparency. And of course, you can learn more about us on our website. And we have worked in many high value commodity sectors: diamonds, gold, tin, coltan, cobalt, and others. Moving on to the next slide. I don't want to spend too much time on that. I think you can read about us online. So here I want to say a little bit about the history, our history in essentially trying to improve the governance of rough diamonds, and this since 1998. So together with, or at least at a request of NMJD, which is a civil society organization that is a member of the KP Civil Society Coalition, at their request in the late 1990s, we carried out research, again, you see their partnership Africa-Canada, our former name, on the root causes of the country's protracted conflict, including the trade of diamonds. And that led to a groundbreaking piece of research called The Heart of the Matter, which was really the first time diamonds were connected to conflict financing. That research subsequently informed and fed into the creation of the Kimberley process. So we were one of the co-founders, as well as a number, I think a small number of NGOs, including many that are members of the Kimberley KP Civil Society Coalition today. And for that work, we were nominated for Nobel Peace Prize. So we have a long history of working in this sector, of trying to not only expose what is going on, to elevate attention about some of the egregious violations we've heard already, but also to constructively feed into mechanisms to try to control the trade of rough diamonds. Next slide, please. So to underscore the fact that these are not new issues that we're hearing, there's been evidence of egregious issues provided over time and throughout the existence of the Kimberley process. In fact, we have published 25 reports between 2002 and 2016, spanning the globe about, the regulation and trade of rough diamonds, and not only some of the issues throughout the supply chain and in producer communities, but of course the loopholes, the weaknesses, and provided constructive recommendations. As Hans has referred to, the KP just essentially finished, well, a couple of years ago now, a reform cycle that he referred to as failed, and I think that's a just or a qualified assessment, but it's not the first. I believe it was the third, if not the fourth reform cycle, because they happen every 5 years. And so in spite of all of this exposure and the reports that we've been hearing from our partners on the ground, many of whom you're hearing today, it's ongoing. So there has been very little reform in spite of many concrete proposals. And I want to throw an added, maybe added dimension here that we haven't talked about publicly before. It's at the bottom of the slide here, is that since 2016 to current, cyber attacks, have been launched against Impact, our data, our websites, every time we make public statements on diamonds and golds, and this with increasing severity. So of course that doesn't, is not anything comparable to the types of egregious issues that we hear about in producer communities. However, it is something to keep in mind that, there is potentially, this might be a reflection of real resistance to change and the need for change, essentially how important it is to move forward and to improve the sector in spite of these challenges that are being launched at critics and civil society more broadly. Next slide, please. So after 17 years and after frustration over several reform processes that have led to nowhere, Impact left the Kimberley process in 2017. And we have since worked with the KP Civil Society Coalition from the outside and also with other NGOs to bring attention to a number of calls for action, again, to try to improve governance of the sector and make it more robust. And the latest one is the one that I believe will be announced towards the end of this webinar, where there is still call for evidence and respect, and even asking that there's a stop put to the misrepresentation of written assurances of the WDC's revised system of warranties, because it's quite inadequate by virtue of the fact that is essentially they're encouraging members to educate themselves about the OECD due diligence guidance or about the UN guiding principles. So no real forceful commitment. And that is really what is lacking in the sector, that real forceful commitments and leadership. And civil society, including NGOs like Impact, are quite tired. You can hear the frustration in my voice of seeing the same issues talked about and very little action on the ground and in practice. Next slide, please. So what is the OECD due diligence guidance? I'm going to focus on this as one of the, I'm not going to say an alternative. It is really one of the key standards globally accepted to govern metals and minerals, including diamonds. And it was established and agreed upon and launched in 2010. And the guidance, well, the one I'm speaking to is about metals and minerals, including diamonds. There are similar guidances for agriculture, the financial sector, textiles, and garment. It underscores that this is here to stay. It is across everything we consume at all levels of the supply chain, so it's not going away. So this is a standard framework and guidelines for the private sector to contribute to play their role to ensuring that mineral supply chains, in this case, are responsible and that they are not having adverse impacts on communities. So there are 5 steps. And in fact, there's also a multinational enterprise set of guidelines that includes a 6th step, which is about essentially remediation. But the 5 steps of the guidance applicable to minerals are about establishing strong management systems, making sure your company has the right policies in place to make sure that your supplies are clean. The second is to identify and assess and prioritize risks within your supply chain. So actively researching, digging down, identifying risks, managing risks. So being proactive when those risks are identified and brought to your attention, you put in steps to mitigate those risks. And if they remain severe, you have to disengage completely. But the guidance, the spirit of the guidance is to continue to improve when you can to contribute to improvements in the sector. The 4th step is about audits and monitoring, validated independent third-party audits to essentially validate claims and make sure that what is being reported on is accurate, that the risks identified are comprehensive. And finally, very importantly, is communicating and publicly reporting on the risks that have been identified and how that private sector actor has essentially responded to those risks. So that public reporting piece is extremely important. Next slide, please. So when we talk about due diligence then in the context of the OECD guidance as applied to minerals, metals, and like I said, these other commodities now, due diligence is about the private sector's duty to identify, mitigate, and publicly report on risks on their supply chain. And when we talk about risks, there is a basic set of risks that are called Annex 2 risks that are like, let's say the most severe form of risks. And really, this is a baseline. The idea of the guidance as well is you can go well above that and identify other risks. But the very just kind of like basic premise or the basic set of risks that need to be identified are serious human rights violations, including the worst forms of child labor, including systemic sexual and gender-based violence, for instance, slave labor, et cetera. Direct and indirect support to non-state armed groups. Now, remember, the Kimberley process is only about armed groups that are essentially using the proceeds of diamonds to essentially overtake a legitimate government. That's how narrow it is. But this is a whole list of risks here that have to be examined when carrying out your due diligence. And again, they're just the basic floor. So direct and indirect support to public or private security forces who illegally control mine sites, transport routes, and bribery, fraudulent misrepresentation of origin of minerals, money laundering, non-payment of taxes, fees, royalties, etc. And on the other side is an example, again, not exhaustive, of the types of information that's needed to go towards proving or that those risks are not or are in your supply chain that are then essentially verified by an auditor and ongoing monitoring to make sure that that supply chain is responsible. I've put here on a side, if it's of interest, a small video on Impact's website at the very bottom. It's applicable to artisanal gold, but it explains what due diligence is, the type of risks, and it's quite informative. Again, it applies to gold as it does to diamonds. So if you want a snapshot to better understand the types of risks being identified, I encourage you to check that out. It was produced for a Just Gold project in Ivory Coast. Next slide. So one of the strengths then of the strengths of the OECD guidance when considering it as applied to existing diamond governance, let's say, is that the definition is broader. And not only broader than the KP definition, but it's open to additional criteria. So it has adaptability. The decision-making in terms of the creation of the guidance was multi-stakeholder. No one group, government, civil society, private sector, had more say over another. It's not like one pillar had voting rights and not another. And since decision-making is not rigidly consensus-based. Essentially, we work together, and I say we because we have been instrumental in the creation of this guidance and participating in the implementation or testing its implementation over the years, but it's not consensus-based in the sense that it's not so rigidly consensus-based that you can't move forward together and change over time as the situation changes over time and learnings are acquired. It has credible independent monitoring. That is also intended to be public facing, at least the summaries of the third-party independent audits. And I put but there because there's still a lot to learn. These are difficult things to implement. Independent third-party audits are also not a panacea. They have weaknesses, auditors need to be trained, and we've seen a lot of gaps over the years. We also value and should value more the independent monitoring of civil society organizations like the ones we're hearing about today as a complement to audits for ongoing monitoring. IPIS also does great work in terms of analysis on the ground, which should also be feeding into independent validation. Transparency, again, public reporting of that step 5 about the risks that have been identified and how they've been mitigated. That public facing transparency about what's actually happening in the supply chain. It's not behind closed doors. And a final point here is about mandatory human rights environmental due diligence based on the OECD. It's becoming law in a number of jurisdictions globally. So even if the diamond sector wants to kind of hide away from it and ignore the OECD or this broader move across commodities to be more transparent and more credible in terms of evidence-based claims and validation, this is being mandated. And so it's a trend, and the train has long left the station, and it's important for the diamond sector to get on board. On the right here, I'm just showing a certificate for gold for a regional certification mechanism that we were involved in which 12 African states were involved. But those 12 African states, through a regional body called the ICGLR, co-developed the OECD guidance and aligned with the OECD guidance. So those African states have spelled out African state responsibilities in the Great Lakes region, whereas the OECD guidance is really about the private sector. So unfortunately, the OECD guidance is called OECD guidance, but it was developed very closely with African states in Central Africa. And so it had real buy-in, and still does, from those countries of Africa. So it's not necessarily something that's imposed from the West. Unfortunately, it has a name that suggests otherwise. Next, please. So what due diligence is not? In the KP and the diamond world, we hear a lot about traceability and provenance. That is just following, the commodity, knowing where the commodity came from, and having some degree of financial follow-up as well, like a chain of custody, so we know what was changed hands and for how much. But due diligence is not traceability or provenance. It can be a part of due diligence, but due diligence goes way beyond that, because you're asking about the context and documenting the context by which something has been extracted and traded for the whole supply chain. So it's much more comprehensive. Unsubstantiated claims are not due diligence. There has to be proof of everything you say, and this is essentially validated and verified. The absence of public reporting is not due diligence. And if you're a member of an industry association or you adhere to certain standards, that is also not a substitute for genuine due diligence. Private sector actors have to do their own due diligence and go deep in their supply chain, identify risks, and report on those risks. So memberships and standards are good guidance, but they are not a substitute for your own due diligence. And finally, it's increasingly clear that the absence of due diligence and transparency pose a commercial risk for private sector actors. So again, time to get on that train if you're not on it already. Next slide. So why is due diligence important for the diamond sector? Again, it is an individual private sector responsibility that is increasingly a legal requirement against several jurisdictions. So don't wait until you don't have a choice. It is happening. The diamond sector's image rests on public trust, and trust can only be maintained with transparency and evidence claims that can be independently verified. And civil society and NGOs are increasingly, I would say, skeptical of the Kimberley process, or they've left the Kimberley process like ourselves and Global Witness. And so there's a real, I won't say just appetite, but insistency on transparency and claims that have evidence behind them. And that is happening in other minerals. It should be happening for diamonds as well. Due diligence provides an avenue for the private sector to engage by their supply chains for more systemic change and to potentially contribute to development. So using your own supply chain, if you have more transparency and you know what's happening all along the supply chain, it means your interventions can be much more targeted and strategic to affect change. There's been a lot of good work in terms of charitable donations and projects over the years, but wouldn't it be so much more interesting if you can use your own supply chain and leverage that for change rather than maybe look for charities to invest in, which are important, but you have the power to affect change with the business decisions you make on a day-to-day basis. Next slide. So last slide. What can you do as a buyer? Carry out your own 5-step due diligence. And that is not easy, especially if it's the first time you do it. Look for guidance. That guidance exists. Many of us on the panel here, many who are listening today, I'm sure can provide guidance. There are consultancies and Christina Miller and colleagues understand due diligence. And there's more and more experience now in terms of how to apply it because it's existed for 10 years. So look for guidance, it exists. Insist that your suppliers do their due diligence as well. You're accountable if you're buying from them. So you got to push that accountability up the supply chain. Demand independently verifiable evidence and demand transparency. Learn from, as you're doing today, affected communities firsthand. Learn from others who model 5-step due diligence. And we'll hear from Kesha shortly. And FTJCO has really put in place this 5-step due diligence process. They were involved in a project, in one of our projects called Just Gold in DRC, and they produced a 5-step report. So they get it, and they've done a great job. And so, model and look to leaders in your sector. As I mentioned, 10 years on, we have lots of experience from other minerals and metals. I have to say, I still sense that the diamond world is a bit in a box and doesn't realize that gold and cobalt and a number of minerals and metals, for example, essential to the transition away from the carbon, our carbon dependency. So minerals and metals essential for electric vehicles, et cetera. They're far surpassing the diamond sector, and there's so much to learn. So that cross-pollination is so critical, but those are opportunities that are missed. Be brave, don't disengage. This might be overwhelming, but we need you to be part of critical change for good by playing your part in the supply chain and again, leveraging your commercial weight. And remember that there are 40 million women and men who depend on artisanal mining, not just diamonds, but artisanal mining globally for their livelihoods. So if you turn away from just, it's too complicated, these issues are just too scary, you actually may be part of the problem. So we really have to engage for change. And finally, partner and openness for change. Due diligence is hard, which is why you have to partner with experts and others, such as those on this call today, to affect change. And when it's hard, is where it matters the most. And we need you to participate in that. So this is really an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne. And I think you already perfectly provided the link to the next presenter, Kesha, who will talk about how they translate due diligence in their purchasing practices. Kesha.
Thanks, Hans. Joanne's right. Full transparency is what we do at FTJCO. It's been one of our core values since our inception in 2006. And we're always upfront and honest with our clients about what we know and what we don't know when it comes to the materials we work with. And we make that knowledge publicly available on our website's provenance page. We break down and identify gaps in knowledge and in due diligence within the supply chains that we work with. When it comes to diamonds, there really isn't a luxury of choice to source goods responsibly. So we currently do not purchase stones without an origin claim. No origin means there cannot possibly be any due diligence associated with those goods. And we tell that to our clients. That's reflected in one of our most recent client reviews, actually. So what this means is we don't currently purchase diamonds from Africa, but that doesn't help fix anything, just like Joanne was saying. It's just ignoring a problem, and that's not beneficial for anyone. It doesn't help move anybody forward. So we've realized that our MO is to learn through trade. With that in mind, we've engaged with upstream actors in Africa in the past, and we managed to source stones that were mined, cut, and polished in situ, but the goods weren't commercially viable. We haven't been able to sell any of those goods because they're too expensive for what they are, especially as compared to lab-grown goods, which clients are gravitating more and more towards than any other source as we see it these days. So we're currently exploring new options for sourcing ASM diamonds in Africa in the hopes that we can find new and commercially viable goods and options for our clients, because again, trade is how we learn. It's how we explore supply chains, test the limits of claims, explore the commercial viabilities of goods. And that learning is really a two-way street. We learn from the communities mining the goods, what challenges they face, what the realities are for them on the ground. And in turn, they can learn from us what sells, what doesn't, what information needs to be captured to make viable claims, and so on. So in short, I'll leave you with a little anecdote on why disclosing origin and providing documentation and data to attest to that is so important. And I, again, can't stress this enough for any retailers or manufacturers currently watching the webinar. You have to ask for some kind of proof to back up a claim, an origin claim, or any other claim. We recently engaged in a conversation with a diamond dealer who claims to sell only Canadian goods and has mine-to-market traceability. When we asked for basic proof of these claims, we were presented with an invoice that stated that the goods were of mixed origin. To put it politely, that's unacceptable. More Canadian diamonds have been sold than have ever been mined. So that's just completely baffling. Jewelry manufacturers and retailers have a duty to do better, to ask basic questions of their suppliers. We owe it to our clients, to our stakeholders, and ultimately to our children. We can't ignore the problem of the current system, and we are actively compromising our collective futures if we don't participate, engage, and demand the change. Guys, gals, and non-binary pals, thanks for your attention. I will pass it back to Hans. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kesha, for this reality check from the other end of the supply chain. I think all presenters have now perfectly set the scene for the coalition's call for industry action, which will now be presented by Simiso. Simiso Mlevo, I hand it to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Hans. So I'm Simiso Mlevo with the Center for Natural Resource Governance in Zimbabwe. So I will make a call to the industry on why they should act on the issues that affecting diamond mining and also the communities hosting mining companies. Okay. So human rights challenges bedeviling the diamond industry are sector specific in that they dent the spark of the gems. So these days there are synthetic diamonds and their producers take advantage of the laxity of responsible sourcing to decampaign natural diamonds. You hear arguments that synthetic diamonds are ethically sourced, they are eco-friendly, and they are far more affordable than their mined counterparts. I'm sure we also heard from Kisha saying the consumers now prefer lab-grown diamonds. However, we cannot sit and watch this continue. But again, the industry must not be sustained at the expense of the harsh realities faced by the host communities. We heard from Thabo saying, he said in Lesotho, there are slime dams which are troubling the community. Here in Zimbabwe, we have got the problem of running battles between artisanal miners and private security guards at Marange diamond fields. There's also been killings in Tanzania by Petra diamonds. Okay, so next slide. So the industry faces these specific sector challenges when it comes to responsible sourcing due to the generic consumer-facing marketing that characterizes the global industry as universally beneficial and oversimplifies complex global challenges. When you hear the industry talking of the benefits of diamonds, you think that people in Marange or people in, let's say, in Lesotho know what a diamond is. These people do not know what it is. And really the benefits are superficial. So the other challenge is the failure by the Kimberley process certification scheme to adapt to the current challenges faced by the host communities in most producing countries, especially in Africa. So as a result, a conflict of blood diamonds still circulate and are being sold.
We seem to have lost Simiso. Simiso, can you hear us? I'm afraid not. So I think I will again, unfortunately, have to take over unless if Simiso manages to get back on. Now I think she's entirely off now. All right, let me try and continue where Simiso left it, and apologies for these inconveniences, which are, of course, also very inconvenient to us. So Simiso was going through our call for industry action, which we'll also put on our website immediately after this webinar, so that you can also have a look at it in more detail. There's basically 4 key demands that we propose, key actions that we propose diamond and jewelry industries can take to immediately start contributing to ending this deadlock with regards to the ongoing flow of conflict diamonds. So the first one is what you already see on the slides, is are asked to abandon conflict-free marketing claims, as there exists today no standardized testable system that guarantees that any diamond is free of conflict. Conflict-free assurances constitute consumer deception. So that is number 1. Let me please go to the next slide. The next action we would like diamond and jewelry industries to take is stop talking about diamond affected communities without actually talking with them. We see a lot of references in marketing and elsewhere about communities and how much they owe to diamonds, or how much they stand to lose if natural diamonds mining would decrease. This is our call on industry to honestly, transparently, and without manipulation, engage diamond affected communities, in particular when publicly discussing or making statements about their well-being. Next one, please. Firstly, in line with what we've heard today about due diligence, we ask the industry to start implementing due diligence on diamond supply chains. There's many challenges indeed, we are not there. And given particularly in the diamond sector, we often hear about the challenge of ensuring diamond traceability. We think it is all the more important to start improving diamond mining standards, responsible mining standards, responsible standards at the mining level. In our view, there is today a very promising standard set by the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, IRMA, which has unfortunately not been taken up by any diamond mining company yet. So this is also our call on industry to start putting that into practice. And then please go to our last point. It has already been mentioned. We ask also to stop representing standards created by industry associations, such as the World Diamond Council's revised system of warranties, as proof of ethical diamond origin or actual human rights due diligence. These standards have an important role to play in promoting best industry practices, but they do not substitute for genuine due diligence, as also Joanne explained in her presentation. Simiso, I see you're meanwhile back online. I unfortunately had to take it over from you. That is a real pity. I'm sure you would have done a much better job at this than I have. But I propose we continue, and I hope we can now turn it over to our Q&A session, where I would like to reintroduce Christina T. Miller and Jared Holstein. So the coalition has sought support for all this work early 2021, and that is where we brought them in this capacity on board to specifically support us in carrying out the desired outreach to industry that enabled us to come up with these recommendations. They'll be facilitating the question and answer session today. As you'll see, we might not have time to answer all questions, but we'll try to do as much as we can. And another reminder that the full call to action, because I'm aware I was quite quick, it will be online immediately after this webinar. And I hand it to Jared and Christina. Thank you.
Hello, Hans. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. We're looking at the questions that have been coming in. Some have been answered live in the moment, and some continue to come in. So let's take a moment. There is a kind of big picture still. When you hear there are several people from diamond affected communities on this webinar, and some of the questions that they have are for industry. So to speak it aloud first, a reminder that 500,000 Sierra Leoneans depend on artisanal mining that is not formalized, and mining companies are abusing the rights of host communities. So how do you categorize these stones and the gold coming from those areas in larger markets? I'm wondering if, Joanne, if you might speak to how due diligence processes can work on stones and gold coming from sites that are not yet formalized. It would be interesting to hear your feedback in practical terms.
Sorry, I didn't see that question. So the question is how, from non-formalized sites.
Just to reiterate, when due diligence, we know the reality that there are miners working in areas that are not formalized, and not being formalized, that definition is a soft one, right? That has flexibility. Right. But the question is, how do you apply due diligence in those challenging environments? Very briefly, if you can.
So I'm going to say something that is maybe not terribly practical, but is where the current thinking is. And the OECD guidance doesn't refer to or doesn't insist on a site being legal. They talk more about legitimate artisanal mining activities, because they recognize that in many of these challenging environments where miners depend on artisanal mining, it may be almost impossible for artisanal miners to operate, essentially to get the legal permits, or there might not even be any concessions that can be legally recognized. So the challenge is, and there's a lot of debate about this in a number of mineral sectors, is how do we recognize and define legitimacy if legality is not attainable for the vast majority of artisanal miners? And how do we support legitimate operations to move towards legality? That is about essentially, getting to know the community, the context, the circumstances. So you can do it on a case-by-case basis. But the work is still being done, I would say, in terms of practically what legitimate looks like. And there's still a lot of questions around that. So it is let's just say it's a challenging issue, because we need to recognize the context that artisanal mining happens in, but we shouldn't expect always that they can easily work in legal conditions. So we have to adapt to that reality. Sorry, that's a non-answer, not very helpful.
Thank you very much, Joanne. I have a question from Jaff Bamenjo. Maybe Shamiso, you could try taking this one, or Hans, which is the Central African Republic is the only place in the world today where you can get blood diamonds as defined by the Kimberley process. The partial embargo certainly affects communities that depend on diamond mining for their livelihoods. What can be done to ensure that diamonds produced by communities are not under the control of rebels?
Thank you, Chad. I hope you can hear me. One of the key and important issue when it comes to Central African Republic, it is the implementation of the operating framework that the Kimberley process adopted with respect to the diamonds in Central African Republic. Of course, there are areas that are considered as green zones that are KP compliant, and others that are not KP compliant. So in those regions that are KP compliant and green zones, I think the most important thing is to have a situation where the communities themselves are organized and involved in terms of artisanal mining operations wherever possible. And that is quite important. And these diamonds have to go through the official channels in compliance with KP minimum requirements and operating procedures that are in place. And that is how the communities can benefit, because if the diamonds then go outside the official system, it then means the whole set of diamonds from Central African Republic may be polluted by conflict diamonds from other regions, because people might have an opportunity to inject conflict diamonds from those regions where the rebels are in control of. So I think it's quite important for the Central African Republic government to take control and implement the operational framework that is in place, and this is how communities can benefit. And I think it's also important for other countries in that region, Cameroon and others around, to help Central African Republic in terms of preventing cases of smuggling of diamonds, which are conflict diamonds, into the region. So I think those are measures that clearly should be looked at in terms of improving the situation there, so that with time, once there's stability, then those communities can benefit from the diamonds if the other zones are then considered as green zones or compliant with the KP requirements in terms of the operating framework. So that's how I would answer that question. So it's about action from the Central African Republic to take control of the whole situation. It's a difficult situation, but I think the government should do more.
Thank you, Shamiso. Very complex conversations to keep pursuing. We have time to take one more question, and it's a very practical one, actually, that I think sheds light on the issue. It's coming from what sounds like a jeweler. What about Canada Mark, for example? What about these diamonds? Are they able to be considered conflict-free, or should the definition be dropped for any diamond? So we have a jeweler who could speak to this, but maybe this is actually a coalition question. Hans, I'm going to go to you. Is this what the coalition means? That conflict-free shouldn't be used at all?
Well, indeed, the use of the term conflict-free stems or is entirely based on the Kimberley Process Certification Scheme. That is the mechanism that has defined this term, and that is the basis on which these claims are made. Given that that is a very awkward definition of conflict, and that has become entirely detached from reality, has little to do with what conflict actually means in places where diamond mining is still causing violence. We indeed call to stop using the term conflict-free until there would either be a meaningful expansion of the definition within the KP connected with a more well-functioning mechanism to control how that is actually being implemented. Until that moment, this term has become so detached from reality that the coalition sees no use anymore, or doesn't see how it can still be a reliable term to be used in marketing or in the diamond sector more widely.
Thank you. So we're going to close the webinar. I'm going to request Shamiso that you come on for some closing remarks. And at the end, we're going to share a slide for how you can gather additional information on these topics and follow up by reaching out to the coalition. Shamiso, can you come back on? Great.
Thank you, Christine. Firstly, let me apologize to everyone. I couldn't be during the opening session. Myself and Farai had to attend to an unexpected and urgent KP matter here in Maputo, Mozambique. So the event overran its allocated time. We are part of a KP review mission to assess this country's readiness to join the KP after the country had appeared and for several years disappeared from the KP radar. But we had to witness the process. Now, real care is demonstrated by real engagement between those who mine and sell diamonds and those who live where diamonds are mined. Consumers have made it clear that they care about realities, good and bad, attached to the diamonds they purchase. Affected communities have more than done their part by bringing these issues into light. But these problems are not theirs to monitor, mitigate, fix, or prevent. They are industry's responsibility. The diamond industry exists at the whim of consumer demand and confidence. Bad behavior by any member threatens all members. Just as that bad behavior impacts the well-being of affected communities and ecosystems. So well-meaning words without engagement or enforcement or creating false consumer confidence might be an effective marketing strategy in the short term, but that term is growing ever shorter. The only way forward is for diamond-affected communities, civil society, and the diamond industry working in tandem to ensure that not just the stories, but the realities tied to each stone are as brilliant as the diamonds themselves. So at this time, on behalf of the coalition, I thank you for joining this pivotal webinar. Today, we discussed the work of the coalition, in particular, the country-specific mapping and community surveying work, with a close look at Lesotho and Central African Republic. We introduced you to our call for action, which includes the coalition's expectations for industry going forward. At this time, we invite you to reach out to us. There may be ideas that we haven't thought of yet. We shared our ideas. We look forward to hearing yours. So please get in touch using the links that I will share here. The complete call for action is now available on the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition website, which is kpcivilsociety.org. That's our website. You can also follow us on Twitter. Once again, I thank you for joining and take care. Over to you, Christine.
Thank you to everyone who joined this webinar today. If you follow the path through to the website, you'll be able to access the call for action. And the coalition looks forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much to everyone who attended, and this meeting will now end.